The Illuminate Arts and Faith Conference in Chattanooga, Tennessee wants to help you find your tribe. Do you get way too excited about quoting Wendell Berry or C.S. Lewis in conversations with coworkers? Does your Spotify playlist include hymns, a little jazz, and a whole lot of Andrew Peterson? Join your tribe at Illuminate March 31 and April 1 for education and inspiration from speakers Russ Ramsey, Douglas McKelvey, John Hendricks, and others. Find a complete list of session topics and ticket information at southern.edu/illuminate.
In 2024, I set out to meet as many poets as I could and spend an hour with each one. I got more than I bargained for, more insight, more clarity, more hope. It's proved to be one of the richest highlights of my life. 17 writers, 17 deeply human conversations that made me sit up and pay attention. Franz Kafka once said, if the book we're reading doesn't wake us up with a blow to the head, what are we reading for? A book must be the axe for the frozen sea within us. And that's what I hope this new book will do. I hope it wakes us up, my friends. I hope these conversations will be the catalyst for something to be reawakened, re-enchanted, and reinvigorated. It's called An Axe for the Frozen Sea, Conversations with Poets About What Matters Most. I'm Ben Palpin, and I hope you'll come and listen in as I spend a little time with poets like Lucy Shaw, Malcolm Guite, Dana Gioia, and Lee Young Lee. Pull up a chair at the table as we dig into what it means to write well and to live well. An Axe for the Frozen Sea is now available from Rabbit Room Press. Visit the store at rabbitroom.com, or better yet, ask about it at your favorite bookseller.
Something that I think we talked about earlier was also that feasting is very present. There's the preparation, of course, and there's the cleanup. There's the cleanup of the feast. But to feast, you have to be here presently. You can, of course, be remembering, and you can be looking forward. And also, the feast is happening now.
Welcome to the Habit Podcast, conversations with writers about writing. I'm Jonathan Rogers, your host. John Cowell is a celebrity chef, at least among those who have participated in the Rabbit Room's Hutchmoot gatherings in the past few years. His food-related essays/orations are a Hutchmoot highlight. In this final Habit Podcast episode of 2021, John Cowell and I had a nice talk about feasting, fellowship, and other pleasures relevant to the Christmas season. John Cowell, I'm so glad you're on the Habit Podcast today.
Yeah, so glad to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
So this is a season of feasting that we are in the midst of. Well, I guess it's a season of waiting. Waiting, feasting.
I know, all the debate about that.
Yeah, right. Let's talk about feasting, though. We'll talk about waiting. So if waiting comes up, great. But I want to talk about feasting, creativity. You're a person who you cook, you write, you do all kinds of interesting things, and the floor is open, John.
The floor is open. Well, I know you said let's not talk about the waiting, but I think that is what gets us to the feasting, right? Like, we're not in a season of feasting all of the time.
Okay.
Then it wouldn't be feasting. It would just be like, oh, this is normal life, and eventually this is gluttony. Eventually we become gluttons if we eat pizza every day. Yeah. It's like we looked forward to in my family, like, oh, we go to Blockbuster, and then Little Caesars is right next door. That was Saturday night. Uh-huh. Like, we work all week. We do our homework. I did my homework most of the time. And then Saturday night, my parents got to pick a movie. I got to pick a movie, and then Little Caesars was right next door. That was the feast. Yeah. But if we went to Little Caesars every day, that probably wouldn't have been a good idea.
Yeah. So you and I chatted last week when we were deciding whether or not to do this, and we got on the subject of, is there a difference between a feast and a party? Or rather, that's not the right question. There's a kind of party that the spirit of the party is we're going to forget about life's troubles.
Right.
And there's a kind of party that says the spirit of this party is that we're going to enter into and enjoy and revel in the good things that life offers, even if life is hard and difficult.
Yeah. What's the Venn diagram of that, of those sort of gatherings?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a thing I think that feasting requires. I guess there's a thing that sort of living requires, or of sort of being alive is what is truth. What am I? How do I engage in telling the whole story, including the parts that are maybe less desirable, or that are harder, or that are painful? It's. I'm just thinking about the season for Jewish people that's ending, the of Hanukkah. And the reason that feast is so amazing is because there wasn't enough oil, but then the oil lasted.
Yeah.
Right? Like, if there's a story of like, oh, we lit the lamps for 8 days. Okay. I turn on my electric lamp every night.
8 days is nothing.
8 days is nothing. Right. Like, I've been turning on my lamp every day for the last, 3 years that I've lived in this house. The miracle is that there wasn't enough oil. And that's part of the story. And so when the feast of so many of these stories that we hear, both, secularly and in the Bible, there was something that happened. There was this sort of reminder of the condition of life, which is hard sometimes. Mm-hmm. And then there is reason to celebrate. There's this thing that we're celebrating. There wasn't enough oil, but it lasted. Like, I think of in Hawaii, first birthdays were such a big deal. People in Hawaii have first birthday parties that are huge, the size of some people's weddings.
Really?
And yeah, and I sort of, when thinking about that, people were like, "Oh, right, because kids died." And so if a kid made it to 1 year old, they were like, "This one's probably going to make it. Let's throw this big party." And so, but that feast, that celebration, is informed by the other thing. Mm-hmm. Kids didn't make it. That's hard. That's hard to think about, that most kids died before they were a year old. And so when there was a kid that did, let's celebrate. Let's feast that. And I think that's an important part of what makes a feast and not just a party, not just a, and then the problem is it's not a problem, but you can reframe anything. Oh yeah, we got pizza every Saturday. Or it's like, man, we worked really hard.
Yeah.
And then we got pizza. I'm reminded of, I went to an Adventist college, Adventists celebrating the same Sabbath as the Jews do, or the same time frame, at least Friday sunset to Saturday sunset. And something my chaplain would talk a lot about was the Sabbath commandment in the 10 Commandments. And he said, we forget the first part of the command. We talk about rest all the time, but we forget the part that says 6 days you should labor and do all your work. Like, that's also part of the commandment. Yeah. Do your work, like do all of it in 6 days and then rest. And so there's feasting, and then there's the other part. There's the other part also, which helps inform the feast.
Yeah. So there's it, and then there's the idea of feasting to remember. That, so many of the feasts, the purpose of the feast is to remember some event in the past, some provision in the past, or some triumph in the past.
I recently heard an interview with Andrew Garfield that I loved. I was on one of the sort of late night talk shows, Jimmy Fallon or something. And they were talking about how his mother died recently. And he was talking about grief. And he said, my paraphrase of it is, he said that grief was all of the unexpressed love he's like, I have so much love for my mother that I'm not going to get to express anymore. And that's what grief is like. So he said, I hope I grieve forever because I have so much love for her, which was so wonderful. And he sort of said, he's like, and that's all of us, right? We are never going to have enough time with these people that we love. They are going to die and we are going to move on, and that will happen to us as well. And I love that idea of sort of even in grief, there's celebration. Like I'm celebrating in my grief the love that I still have for this person that I've yet to express.
Yeah, it's like a phantom limb almost.
Right. And I love that as part of feasting, the remembering. Something that I think we talked about earlier was also that feasting is very present. There's the preparation, of course, and there's the cleanup. There's the cleanup of the feast. But to feast, you have to be here presently. You can, of course, be remembering, and you can be looking forward. And also, the feast is happening now. Mm-hmm. It's not something you can sort of put off later. It's like trick-or-treating the day after Halloween.
Yeah, right.
Right. Then you're just a beggar.
That's good. I was looking for a book that I probably won't be able to find. But Joseph Pieper talks about the idea that the precondition of the feast is to approve of the world that you find yourself in some way, right? I mean, obviously we don't approve of everything in the world, but
totally.
But a condition of feasting is I'm going to celebrate the world that I find myself in.
Right. As it is.
Yeah, as it is.
Yeah.
And in so doing, perhaps provide a foretaste or a premonition of what the world can be. But we're still making a feast out of the materials of the world as it is.
Yeah. I this about me, but I'm a little bit curmudgeonly about holidays, of all kinds. And I think the thing that's wonderful about most holidays, most of the time, is that they do just that. There's Thanksgiving probably in Canada a little bit more than the US, but Thanksgiving in Canada is very much like, oh, let's celebrate harvest. It's still about that. It's there's the end of the season. There's this abundance of food. It's right before winter when there just is going to be less. And let's celebrate right now. Easter in most cultures, that idea of Easter of, it's springtime, there was death. And now there is life. Let's celebrate the right now, the reminder that life begins again, which again, you can't do in summer. If you had that celebration in summer, it means something different than it does when you're celebrating it right when the snow is starting to melt and the daffodils are poking up. And so you have to be present for those things to really feel, to engage in the impact of the feast.
Yeah, that's good. And I love the winter solstice. I'm very conscious. I know the days are dark, but it's like, but they're not going to get it's not going to get dark any earlier anymore. And I can make it knowing that the days are getting a little longer. Right? And in Nashville, we're so far east in the time zone that it gets early. It gets dark really early.
Yeah. Yeah.
It really hurts my feelings. But then it gets better.
One thing that I find interesting about the solstice or this time right around the solstice, it's like people forget what, it's like, well, that was just last year. People are like, oh, it's so dark. It's getting so dark so early. And I'm like, right. But that was just a year, this has been happening now for all of eternity. As long as humans have been sort of keeping a calendar, I guess daylight saving sort of nicks that up a bit in some parts of the world. But it's interesting that we as humans are people who forget.
Mm-hmm.
That just happened. It just happened last year that it was dark at this time, dark at this time, and still we sort of stand at our windows or we're driving home from work and we're like, oh man, it's so, so dark. I don't know what's happening. And it's like, well, that just happened.
Yeah.
And we're going to forget next year too. And so I think that's another thing, at least about the feasting that sort of happens annually. It's like, oh, right, I need to be reminded. If we think about Sabbath as a feast, that one day a week, it's like, oh, right, I'm going to forget. I need to be reminded.
Yeah.
To use the old metaphor of, it's like, oh, right, in Egypt, they just kept making bricks. They just kept making bricks and bricks and bricks, and they forgot what it was like to not make bricks.
Yeah.
And so they needed to be reminded, which is something, as sort of curmudgeonly as I am against holidays, it is like a nice, like, oh, right, that's what this time of year is about. I'm supposed to remember this at this time. Like you were saying about the solstice. Oh, right, light comes again.
Yeah.
I'm not there yet, and it's coming.
Yeah. Yeah. So talk to me about how your life as a cook and a chef informed, and a person who thinks about feasting a lot, how that informs your work as a writer.
I think one thing that's hard about being a writer is that you have to tell the truth.
Mm-hmm.
There's a thing that, when I'm reading my own work or when I'm reading other people's work, there's sort of a lie detector that happens, and you don't know, it's like, you don't know how but this doesn't feel true to life. And then you're paying attention to that more than you're paying attention to the story. I think with, and sometimes you can get away with it is the thing. Sometimes you can get away with it. And since I write a lot of nonfiction, I used to do a lot of newspaper work, and now I do a lot of sort of essay and memoir work. I'm often having to tell the truth about myself. Yeah. Which is something that most people are not accustomed to doing. We go on job interviews and you say, no, you present the best version of yourself. Yeah. And that doesn't make for the best writing, because it's not entirely true. Yeah. I think the way that food informs that is that there is less buffer in food to lie. Food comes down to, do you like it or do you not like it? Like, food comes down to, is it good or not good? And that's different. That's different for everyone, whether or not it's good. And there's no one sort of confuses food beyond that. There are no other layers.
Wait a minute.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. So there are these food scientists,
sure,
who make stuff that makes your tongue think it tastes good.
Yeah.
And your brain. Yeah. And those same parts of your brain that are supposed to tell us, hey, this is good. You're doing a good thing by eating this.
Yeah.
It's telling us a lie. Like McDonald's is lying to me.
Oh, you mean like health-wise? Like,
well,
like nutritionally, it's not good for you.
I don't. I'm just not quite ready to. I mean, like the spray cheese stuff,
Yeah,
that's
love that stuff.
Good. Yeah,
that stuff tastes good. Yeah, that was hotel food for us when I was a kid. Like, you'd go to
what's it called? Cheese Whiz.
Cheese Whiz. Yeah.
Is that
easy cheese? Easy cheese.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, are you not willing to make some kind of because Cheese Whiz or Easy Cheese, whatever, tastes good. Is that the only level at which I need to be? We can't
be cognizant of food.
What's that?
Yeah. Is that the only level that you need to be cognizant of food at, whether or not it tastes good?
Well, I don't. Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, I guess here's what I have to say about that.
Without getting into the science of new, I have to put science in quotation marks when I talk about nutrition because it changes every time I turn around. But is there? So leaving nutrition out of it, and even leaving health out of it.
Sure.
But I feel good about being a grown man liking Cheese Whiz.
Yeah. Why? Here's my question back to you. Why wouldn't you?
Because I think maybe it is taking me farther away from the realities of the world. Right. I mean, I was made in such a way to the fact that Cheese Whiz can make me less inclined to. Okay.
Yeah.
From what I understand, crystal meth, also makes you feel good, and it totally. But then it deadens your ability to enjoy reality. Right. And that's my concern. So, Cheese Whiz.
I know. Who knew we were going to talk about crystal meth today? So here's the thing about meth, though. If you are a person, and I again, this my bare knowledge of science behind this. I have a friend who's a nurse that used to work at a methadone clinic. So people come and can take the substances safely while without sort of judgment or. By the time you get to crystal meth, you are unable to make logical choices about whether or not you are going to take it. Right? You're addicted to crystal meth. And that is the truth of what's happening.
Okay.
So, and there's sort of no way around that. There's sort of no way around saying the truth is I'm addicted to crystal meth. There's the dot. What I love about food is there is very little way to lie about food. Meaning, I'm going to bring the nutrition thing back into it. Okay. We can be drinking kale smoothies, and maybe there are some of us who like kale smoothies. Yeah, right.
No judgment for people who like kale smoothies.
No judgment for people who like kale smoothies. And for those of us that don't, we are very cognizant that we are drinking the kale smoothie for our health and not for enjoyment. Okay. We're aware that I am doing this because it's doing something for me. It's doing something sort of for my, my important squishy insides, and not because I'm yum, kale smoothie. In fact, so many of the people that I know that enjoy kale smoothies are not just, having blended kale and ice in a glass. They're also putting apples and bananas and a little bit of honey and vanilla almond milk so that they enjoy it a little bit more. My point about food is that if we are truly engaging in our food, there is very little beyond sort of the simple, do I like it or do I not like it? And that doesn't mean we eat it or we don't eat it. But we know the truth about the food. And we are, I think the thing about food that's fascinating is we are unable, at least for very long, to lie about it. What the statistic of there's a statistic that I just saw recently. Most people who go on diets regain the weight in 2 to 7 years. Because we can't engage in sort of going against our food preferences for that long.
Yeah. You can push the beach ball down, but it's going to pop up. You push the beach ball below the surface, but it's going to pop back up.
Yeah, we can all be polite at dinner, right? We can all be polite when we go to someone's house and they give us, a spinach salad that we don't like or whatever it is. And we can't do that every night. Eventually, after that dinner party that we didn't like, we're going to swing by Taco Bell on the way home, or whatever the place is, whatever the place we love is. And we're going to eat that instead. And for me, how that informs my writing is that for it to be good, I can't lie for very long. I have to get to the place where I say, oh, right, my family bought Ritz crackers and Easy Cheese when we went on vacation, and that was hotel room food.
Yeah.
And for me, the wonderful sort of window to storytelling that food has given me is that since food is so hard to lie about, it's like one step closer to me telling the truth.
Yeah.
If I tell you the truth about my, uncouth, sort of low social status, Easy Cheese, so then it's a little bit easier for me to say like, oh, right, for a while we were poor. And when we stayed in a hotel, it wasn't a fancy hotel. It was the Motel 6.
Yeah.
And then I also get to tell the story of like, oh, even when we stayed in fancier hotels, we still bought Easy Cheese because that's who we were.
Yeah.
Right. So we weren't people who had money our whole lives. We were people who came upon money, but on the inside, we still craved Easy Cheese.
Yeah.
And that to me tells the more, a fuller story, which then if I bring that back to feasting is like, oh, right, it's not this. Like there is now.
You're making us small hands.
Right. Yeah.
This is audio.
This is audio. It's not this tiny bit of the story. I am present in this. I am present. And also if I widen the breadth of my view, I'm able to see that there was not enough oil, but it lasted. Right.
Yeah.
We are people who are in a fancy hotel right now. Also, we are eating Easy Cheese. And that's for me, that's been the biggest help, or the biggest influencer on tying food and writing together is it's really hard to lie in food. Food tells the truth.
Yeah.
And that has helped me become a better writer.
Yeah.
And what I would say to people in any sort of creative field is figure out how to tell the truth with whatever you're creating.
With with an Audible membership, you get these books that are included, and so I end up listening to things I wouldn't choose. And I've recently listened to 2 memoirs by celebrities that were so obviously efforts to whitewash, people they didn't have great reputations, and their effort to say, well, here's my side of the story in ways that weren't quite that. They were trying to be more subtle than that, and yet it didn't feel subtle at all. These people who were not committed to telling the truth in these stories. Like they had an agenda that you said earlier, that you reach a point, just a little whiff of untruth in a piece of nonfiction taints the whole thing. Right.
Yeah.
I hear it's so tempting in writing memoir or, personal essays, just to make a little bit of an adjustment to make the story a little bit better, or to make me not look like such a jackass or whatever.
Right.
And it doesn't end well. And you think you're getting away with it. And so I guess sometimes you can get away with it. I'm not saying you can never get away with it, but the problem is you never know when you're not getting away with it.
Yeah. Yes. Just yesterday, I was working on a section of an essay where I talk about the 3 sets of knives that I've owned over my professional career as a chef. And 3 sets of knives is also a lot. Most chefs are like, oh, here's my set of knives. And I take really good care of them. I should not own 3 sets of knives. I own 3 sets of knives. And I got to the 3rd set of knives, the knives that actually the only set that I purchased for myself. My first set was purchased for me by my father. The 2nd set was purchased for me by a donor, someone who sort of liked the work I did and wanted to do something nice for me, donated some money, and I bought a set of knives with that. The 3rd set of knives I bought for myself, and they are very fancy knives. I write in the essay that I bought them on discount, like they were on clearance, and I was teaching cooking classes at the moment, so I got a professional discount on these knives. And even sort of with that discount, the knife set cost more than a month's rent.
Wow.
And I was looking at them online yesterday, sort of what they're, and they've appreciated in value. And I was
really?
Oh man. Yeah. And I, just for context, it's a set of 8 knives. And one of them was like $500, which was more than I think my first set of knives cost, one.
How many cans of easy cheese can you buy with $500?
Right. How many cans of easy cheese? Not that many. Just side note, I wanted easy cheese like sometime in the last year. And so I was looking for it. And, and, I was at the grocery store and I was like, how is this easy cheese? $5.50. I was like, what is this? I can buy real cheese for cheaper than this. The point of easy cheese was that it was inexpensive. But I'm writing this paragraph about the knife sets I've owned, and like, there wasn't a way to frame it, right? There was like, right, you were frivolous and bought this thing that you didn't need. And actually, since I've purchased it, I've used it so little because I'm sort of afraid to use it. Like, I don't want it to get messed up. It's like too pretty. My other set of knives was fine. Which was so fascinating for me to be doing that thing that you were talking about, right? Like, there wasn't a way that if I'm telling the truth in the story, I have to admit that I was being frivolous. Which I hope part of art, not all of art. I don't think art needs to be utilitarian. I hope part of art compels people and compels society forward. And that can only happen from a place of truth. We can't grow and learn if I'm still trying to convince myself that I am not sometimes frivolous, that I am not sometimes concerned with my image. I have to start from that place. The Christmas story, I can go there. How we celebrate the Christmas story and the parts of the Christmas story that we focus on really inform how then we celebrate it, how we feast, which then sets us up for the rest of the Christian calendar. How do we, from this point, then continue on with the story? And the trick is there are lots of facets, right? It is true that that God came in glory, that there were angels and they were singing, that there was a star, that that wise men from the east came to worship and brought gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh. Those things are true, and it's also true that there was like some sketchy marriage stuff going on between marriage Joseph stuff. And Mary.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. There were some like immaculate conception that people maybe didn't understand. At the time. It's true that they were cast out of staying in the inn. It was probably a cave. That's where the savior of the world was born, was in a cave. It's true that they were born in the middle, that he was born in the Middle East, that he was a person of color. Those things are also true. And how do we let let the fullness of that story then inform how we feast. Jill Phillips sings it, but sort of that brilliant line in "Behold the Lamb of God," right? It was not a silent night. Mm-hmm. If we let ourselves ruminate on that as part of our feasting, we're feasting about this event that was all of sort of the sort of beauty of stars and gold and wise men and kings, and also was not a silent night. How does that inform how we feast?
Are you about to answer that question?
Oh yeah, if you haven't answered that question, that'd be great. I'm still looking, I think, for for how to do that. I recently heard a pastor talk about our shelf getting bigger, was sort of his metaphor of how do we keep two true things next to each other on the shelf. Mm-hmm. You have to make the shelf bigger. So how do we keep on the shelf sort of the idea of Christ as helpless baby, turned away in a cave, to sort of minority, socially outcast people of color parents, next to the idea of Christ as king, and glory, and if you make the shelf too small, then you can only look at one of those things, which then negates the other thing, which isn't true. Yeah, Christ was not only helpless baby. Also, Christ was not only sort of power and glory, and light. There were two things, and they existed together. Yeah, for most of us, me included, it's easier to just look at the one thing.
Yeah, or take turns looking at the two things.
Or take turns, right? Or take turns. And how do I look at both things at the same time and sort of wrestle with both of those things being true? I think that's what helps me be a better feaster, and not just a glutton, and not just a partier, and not just someone who is forgetting pain, not forgetting the things of life that are a little bit harder. How do you do that? I mean, do I have an answer? I don't know. How do you do that? I'm asking also.
Well, okay. So one aspect of feasting that we haven't, that has perhaps been implied, but we haven't talked about, is the idea that feasting bridges people, connects people, and maybe that might be relevant to what we're talking about here, right? I mean, the stereoscopic vision of Christ in glory, Jesus in a manger, requires, as we said, it's not you look at one, then you look at the other, and somehow you have to have the stereoscopic seeing both at the same time, which then becomes 3D, like the old Viewmaster things that if you
right,
put them together, they become three-dimensional. That also requires a bridging of two different parts of our imagination. Mm-hmm. We're doing this off the top of our head here, John. So who knows how if this is something we're going to be able to.
Who knows? Yeah.
But I feel like that idea of bridging, which is so important to, the idea of paradox that is central to Christian theology and a Christian view of the world, is also exceedingly relevant to the creative life and to creative work, and is also related to the way we connect to one another, and that love, Chesterton talks about the idea that love isn't a mixture of red and white into pink, but rather love somehow manages to say there's red and there's white, and we can stay red and stay white and still love.
Right.
Which am I?
Yeah. No, I hear what you're saying. I think the thing for me, the maybe an illustration of all of those things coexisting, as it regards to feasting, is that if I'm thinking about the Eucharist, if I'm thinking about that feast, it's a feast that everyone's invited to. Mm-hmm. It's this idea that all of the disparate parts come together at the table. And if I'm thinking about feasting in terms of community, at a feast, everyone's invited, mm-hmm. right? And theoretically, whatever is happening with all of those people, we are still coming together at the feast. And so if I'm looking at a Christmas party, which is not always a feast, we'll keep those ideas separate. If I'm thinking about a Christmas party, there's the person who comes, who is like stressed from work. There's the person who comes who is like, oh yeah, man, I'm going to get to see all my friends. There's the person who comes who is sitting in the corner and quiet. There's the person who is like fiddling with the stereo the whole night. There's the person that just wants to play games. There's the person who's in the kitchen. All of the parts are there together, and they are what make up the flavor and the community of that feast, right? The person who is at the stereo fiddling with it all night is someone who is kind of annoying to me. Also, without that person, the music is different, right? Without that person, someone puts on, the Mariah Carey Christmas album, and then it's just on repeat the whole night. And it makes the party feel different. Yeah. And so, and the thing about then the Christmas story is that all of those people came together to celebrate this thing. And some of them not even knowing what the celebration was about. They were like, oh, I think I just got to go, I think I just got to go to this thing. And I think that, and to me, that's part of what makes a feast is all of the disparate parts being able to come together to celebrate something. Mm-hmm. I am not from the South, so I'm not intimate with this history, but I recently saw something recently that was talking about the history of barbecue. Uh-huh. And one of the places that barbecue, from my understanding, often happened was at the tobacco harvest. And the commentary was, at the tobacco harvest, everyone was equal because there was all this work that needed to happen at once. So at the tobacco harvest around barbecue, everyone was equal because they all came together for one purpose. Uh-huh. And I think that's part of a feast, and which often happens around holidays, which often happens around memorials or remembrances. It's the disparate parts coming together to share in an experience, to share in a celebration together. And the disparate parts don't need to be answered. Right. There wasn't the shepherd, and historically speaking, they weren't there at the same time. But the shepherd wasn't upset at the wise man for being richer than he was. Yeah. And the wise man wasn't like, oh, shepherds, I don't want to, associate with them. It was like, oh, right, we're all here together as we are, the truth as we are in the present, to all engage in this thing. Yeah. So earlier when you proposed, there's Christ in glory, there's the baby in the manger, how does that inform our feasting?
you know, and I was trying to get an answer out of you, and you were trying to get an answer out of me.
Yeah.
You know, a feast isn't an equation. It's something that's enacted. And so we come together, we celebrate, we do, you know, that's not, that's not the crypto quote from the newspaper where, okay, A equals actually T, and you spell out you decode the thing by, you just participate.
Right.
And the fact that these two things aren't reconcilable, then you've just run up against paradox, and that's just the way it is. And the good news is, in creativity and storytelling, the whole point of a story is it creates a space for you to inhabit these two places at once, or for two disparate things to inhabit one place. And that's just the nature of story, the nature of creativity. And the fact that there's no mathematical equation that can account for it, nobody cares, because we've inhabited, we've inhabited or enacted this thing.
Right. And I think where feasting gets toxic here, and I'm setting down my soapbox to step on it for just a second. I think where feasting gets toxic is when we don't engage, when we do try to equation it out and come up with the formula for feasting. And for me, that's why I have such a hard time engaging with a lot of what happens around Christmas, is because for some people, it becomes equation. Oh, right, we get a tree. Mm-hmm. Okay, let's get the tree. Let's wrap presents. Let's buy this. We have to be eating this. Here mm-hmm. are the things we have to be eating at the table for it to be for it to be Christmas. Where that is slightly different than saying, oh, I have this pie on my Christmas table because I want to remember my grandmother. Mm-hmm. This pie, when I eat it, reminds me of my grandmother and what she did, which is actually honestly part of what sort of made me have to think about my engagement as Christmas, is because I have an Asian grandmother who never made a pie in her life. And so when people were like, what do you mean you don't have pie at Christmas? And I was like, well, I don't know. My grandmother never made a pie. I don't know what that's about. And I think that's what's tricky, is that line between equationing it out, for making it a formula of saying, oh, we have pie, that's Christmas. Mm-hmm. And I make this pie intentionally because I want to remember and celebrate. Is really sort of is hard to navigate, because the action is the same. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I am doing the same behavior. What's different is what's inside. Yeah. What's different are my intentions of feasting. Which brings back to something that we have talked about before, is what do my intentions bring to the feast? Yeah. And can feasting happen unintentionally then, which was something interesting to ponder.
Yeah. Can a feast sneak up on you?
Right. Can a feast sneak up on you? We've been talking a lot about intentional feasting and how do we be purposeful in our celebrations? When is a feast unintentional?
We're going to save that for next time, John Cal, because we have gone over our time. I feel like we can go for hours and hours. I usually end with a question: who are the writers that make you want to write? But I'm going to ask you a different question, and that is,
sure,
what are you going to eat for Christmas? I know you're a little suspicious, you're a little curmudgeonly about Christmas, and so maybe just tell us what your plans are.
So my Christmas tradition for myself is that's like the one time of year I normally eat a steak. Huh. That's the one time of year I normally eat a steak. However, in the last maybe 3 years, I've significantly lowered the amount of red meat I eat. And I actually don't eat meat very often anymore. Often just in celebration and feasting do I eat meat now. So I don't quite have a plan for this Christmas. Again, normally I eat a steak, but I didn't eat a steak last year, and I don't think I'm going to eat one this year. I will try to bake something complicated.
Okay.
That is something that I do on Christmas, is I try to bake something complicated that I haven't baked before. Like a few years ago, I tried to bake a croquembouche, which is this like really fussy tower of cream puffs, basically, that you connect with caramel into the shape of a Christmas tree. So I haven't decided what yet this year, but I will be baking something complicated as just a sort of celebration of my, ability. That's fine to celebrate that I can bake and that I know how, and to try to grow, to try to stretch it out. Yeah.
Well, good. All right, John, this is fun. Thanks so much.
Jonathan Rogers, always great to talk to you.
Always a pleasure. All right. See you later.
Thanks for having me. Yeah. Bye-bye.
This podcast is brought to you by The Rabbit Room, where art nourishes community and community nourishes art. And all our podcasts are made possible by the generous support of our members. To learn more about us, visit rabbitroom.com. And to become a member, rabbitroom.com/donate. Special thanks as well to Taylor Linhart for letting us use her song Diamonds as the theme music for Season 3 of the Habit podcast. You can learn more about Taylor and follow her work at taylorlinhart.com.
The Habit membership is a library of resources for writers by me, Jonathan Rogers. More importantly, The Habit is a hub of community where like-minded writers gather to discuss their work and give each other a little more courage. Find out more at thehabit.co.
If you've enjoyed this podcast episode, consider joining the Rabbit Room membership. Your membership helps sustain this community, funding everything from publishing and podcasts and theater productions to events and programs that support artists who create with a Christ-centered vision. We'd love to have you on board. Learn more at rabbitroom.com/member.